We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
I mean, what's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stones.
Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on a Monday morning here on YouTube, Sam.
True.
How you doing?
Not bad. You?
Doing great. It's May 15th.
It is.
We got some football to talk about.
Yeah, there's been real things
news
happening.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Isn't that great?
Yeah. I mean, it's better than the alternative.
Well, let's talk about it. I think some of the things that are happening over the weekend or potentially happening over the weekend might have more of an impact than the actual NFL draft that we just broke down for months.
Okay.
At least for this season. Short-term stuff.
Sure.
So we'll break that all down. And we've got a fun little segment on avoiding narratives, and then another fun segment that I was unaware of until I walked into the building.
Yeah.
But the narrative traps, the bear traps, as you like to call them.
Yes.
We're gonna give you fair warning. We're gonna tell you what not to buy into. Don't get sucked in.
And I have to find the email that was asking about that because I appear to have lost it in my notes here, which is a recurring theme, it appears. Somebody, Cameron on Twitter, was complaining effectively that we didn't give him credit for that the Legends draft idea. Now that one, I think I wasn't aware that somebody had suggested that. I kind of took a couple of leaps from ideas that were put in, and thought that was an original thought. But I'm also willing to concede that it was emailed in as an idea because we've had a million of those. So apologies to Cameron on Twitter. Shout out to him for the idea. That was a lot of fun, adding those legends to each NFL team. Now I shall try and find the person that was asking about the bear traps. Who was it? We're going to get to it later.
Juan Kelly.
Okay.
Well, it's from Scotland.
Yeah.
So.
Spell it?
E-U-A-N.
Yeah, Ewan.
Oh, Ewan, of course.
Yeah. Juan. that's how you.
Yeah. I replaced the E with a J.
Yeah.
And made it a Hispanic name, Juan.
Right.
Ewan.
Why? Why would you do that?
Because I was live on the spot looking at it, and I was trying to get it to you as much as I could. Let me forward it to you just so you see the email.
Yeah. What have I done with that email?
Sam at P. You have I don't want to give out. I don't give out your email.
Yeah? You just give out most of it there. You think that the
NFL podcast at PFF.com.
You think the part you left out is the thing that's going to leave it covert?
The NFL podcast at PFF.com. It's all right. We trust all of our listeners here. So we're going to have some fun with that. And then apparently I'm going to do some GM consulting here today.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that was a thing.
Where is Ewan from there?
Glasgow.
Good enough.
Glasgow.
I don't think there's a way for you to say it right. It's like even when you put
it's
it
not
together,
Glasgow.
Theoretically.
I know that.
No, it's not
Glasgow.
Correct.
You know what else I know is the PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Well, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, man. You ready to get into this?
Mm-hmm.
NFL news over the weekend. A couple things have happened. We have Dalvin Cook release/trade rumors.
Yes.
For the Minnesota Vikings. We have Za'Darius Smith being traded from the Green Bay Packers to the Cleveland Browns, the edge defender, which is a sneaky good move that we'll get into. And then Isaiah Wynn was one of those street free agents, just hanging out on the street, and signed by the Miami Dolphins to play offensive line. And I think he upgrades maybe 40% of their offensive line positions, potentially. At least 2 out of 5, and he becomes a nice little backup at left tackle. So let's start with Dalvin Cook in Minnesota.
So Justin Cohen tweeted over the weekend that per source, he's told that after stalled trade conversations, the Vikings have informed Dalvin Cook that he'll be released following the June 1st designation. That move will save the Vikings $9 million in cap space, which does make sense. I mean, the Dalvin Cook thing, he was one of those running backs that got onto that giant contract, and at that point, as soon as you're tradable and or cuttable, those running backs are always vulnerable, just because that's a giant sum of money to be tying up in a position that is probably not going to move the needle for you.
Yeah, so we've got Minnesota. So obviously so to start, Za'Darius Smith traded by the Vikings. The Vikings are clearing things up here.
Yeah,
with Dalvin,
saving some money,
and with Dalvin Cook, this was kind of expected, right? He's due $14 million this year. He's got a couple more years on his contract. You're talking cap hits in the $14-15 million range. The Vikings are in this weird spot, right, Sam? Like where they competed last year. Maybe it didn't match up with what the numbers said that said should have happened, and now they're at this spot. Kirk Cousins is in the last year of his contract, and there's just a lot of house cleaning going. Guys like Eric Kendricks are gone, Patrick Peterson gone, a lot of players just gone, veterans gone, Dalvin Tomlinson, and it's they're not completely resetting, right? Because you still have one more year of Cousins, and I think they'll be competitive. But there's certainly a youth movement in Minnesota as they get rid of some of these old contracts.
Well, this is going to be the question: these are the moves effectively of a team trying to get their cap back in order and potentially rebuilding. But they're not rebuilding yet because they still have Kirk Cousins. So the question sort of becomes, if this at the end of the Kirk Cousins tenure there in Minnesota, do they fully blow this up and go, complete overhaul, rebuild, clean house completely, or do they try and get this done in this sort of competitive rebuild buzz phrase they've been using before? Like, do they think that they can achieve this turnover that needs to happen of the roster and of the salary cap whilst maintaining a competitive edge and still, the capability of winning that division and maybe making noise in the playoffs?
I mean, what do you think about what they did last year as a starting point? Because you kept saying when Kwesi took over in Minnesota that it was a lot of status quo and, maintenance or whatever. And maybe it was, hey, we're going to give it a shot for 1 year, but we know we're going to have to blow this thing up. I think sometimes we do oversimplify the rebuild and say, completely scrap everything, get down to nothing and then rebuild it back up again. We have a team like Philadelphia just a couple of years ago, don't forget. They were in this spot where, of course, they were coming off a Super Bowl, but they tried to keep the Super Bowl team together as long as they could. And around 2020 or so, they got into rebuild mode, which basically took a year, right? It took Philadelphia a year to get back to the playoffs, to build it back up again, and basically 2 years to get into the Super Bowl window. So it feels like Minnesota's leaning toward that, where the veterans are going to be on their way out. But if you work things properly with the young players and you develop some young players, and you when you do go to spend money again, when money's freed up and you do go to spend it, you spend it in the right places. I feel like you can compete and also build it back up again. But the more you lose guys like Za'Darius Smith and Dalvin Cook, I do think it's harder to look at a deep playoff run for this season.
Yeah, and the last year sort of shows the problem, right? Is Kwesi comes in and they do very much stick to this, pathway that they've been on all along, essentially just replace the guy making the decisions and therefore presumably tinker with the specifics that are going to get done. But overall, the approach was the same as it had been with Rick Spielman and with the previous coaching staff, et cetera. And you can look at it two ways. You can look at it and say, well, it worked, right? They went on this incredible run. They looked like one of the contenders in the NFC, and then ultimately they came unstuck in the playoffs. But the other way of looking at it is, well, okay, they won this insane sequence of one-score games, 11 of them or something, an NFL record that all went in their direction. and therefore flattered their record relative to how good the Vikings were overall. And once they got to the playoffs, where the standard gets higher, they got bounced. And they got bounced actually around earlier than I think most people would have expected them to. Like, they got bounced by the Giants, who then ultimately got bounced themselves when they ran into real good teams. Like, the Vikings didn't even make it to the real good teams before they got drop-kicked out of the playoffs. So when you look at this approach last year, this competitive rebuild concept, is it actually possible? Like, can you overhaul the roster in a way that you need to reach that level of the Philadelphias, the San Franciscos, like the best teams in the conference, without taking it further back to the bone than the Vikings seem willing to do? That, I think, was the question last year, and it's a question now. Like, you're getting rid of these players who, sure, they're coming with giant contract numbers, and there's obviously a reason you want to get rid of them. Like, they are having a major impact on your salary cap right now. On the other hand, it's a really good running back and your best pass rusher, probably, based off last year. So these are difficult moves you're making that are probably making you worse, but might not be taking this thing far enough back that you can then take that big step forward with all the space you cleared.
Yeah, and so the Za'Darius Smith trade was, they had to clear that cap space to be able to sign their draft picks and everything. I mean, they were up against it, and that's $7 million in cap savings this year and $20 million next year. I want to get into that trade in a minute here, but we're talking about a Minnesota team. Adam Thielen is out. He's going to be replaced basically with rookie Jordan Addison. Mentioned some of the other players, right? Like a year 2 linebacker Brian Asamoah is going to replace an Eric Kendricks this year. Second-year rookie Andrew Booth is going to replace a Patrick Peterson at corner. But then when they did go to free agency, it was like 1 year of Marcus Davenport for $13 million. So it's basically like a good Marcus Davenport 1 year prove it type contract for a guy that doesn't really play over 500 snaps. Hey, go play 800 snaps for us this year. Prove it. In exchange for Za'Darius Smith, who they had to trade and save that money. So the problem is, I guess, would say like a Davenport, if he does have a great year, are you just earning a comp pick, or is he gonna be the guy that you invest in going forward? But you got younger, and that's what it is, right? Some pieces have to move out, some pieces are moving in. I think the Vikings still do look competitive, but not Eagles level competitive, for whatever it's worth.
But that's like their baseline, right? Is they probably maintain this spot of being a 500-ish team, a couple of games either side of 500, depending on how good the year goes. And last year, everything broke in their direction. All the one-score games went their way. Like, if that doesn't happen again, this team could be a game under 500 without any problems. It could be a couple of games over 500, whatever. But they're in that world, always. So the question that keeps coming up year after year from Minnesota is, how do you get out of that? Or are you happy being in that world where we're going to be there or thereabouts, we'll challenge for the playoffs most years, we'll make them, more than we don't make them, and then once you're in the big dance, anything can happen, right? They're basically relying on complete random chance that once they're in the playoffs, they can go on a freakish run and win 3 or 4 straight games, and then that's your championship. Like, is that the strategy here? Simply play the odds and get to the postseason as often as humanly possible, and then hope variance bounces in your direction when you make the playoffs. If it is, this is the perfect strategy to achieve that, because that's basically what they've been doing way past Kwesi ever showing up on the scene, but that's how they've been approaching the last several years of things. But it's not maximizing your potential to actually win once you make the playoffs, which is a bigger problem.
I'm interested to see it play out. I mean, when any new GM is going to come in, right? Any new GM comes in and they get their guys instead of everyone else. What?
Oh, we'll get to that later.
Oh, any new GM like me. But, the more moves Kwesi makes, the less you see of the old regime and stuff like that. And, I wonder how much of it's just that, right? If you feel like, kind of like the old Charlie Weiss quote, we got the schematic advantage over here at Notre Dame. If you feel like you have the advantage from a decision-making standpoint, would you lean into just more moves? We're just going to make more moves. I feel like over time we're going to make better decisions, so we're going to undo the old.
But doesn't this look exactly the same as the old?
No, I think this is a youth movement in Minnesota quicker than they did it before.
But they've done it. Like, it's not like this didn't happen. But I mean, they moved on from Stephon Diggs and went younger and cheaper and Justin Jefferson. Like, this has been done before.
Know. Yeah, I mean, there's elements of it, but like in 2017, they go to the NFC Championship, and it felt like they tried to keep that core together a year too long. And I think what Minnesota's doing is not doing a year too long.
Oh, the one big change that might come from Kwesi as a decision maker is, and I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but this was a feature of the old regime, is kind of rewarding sort of longtime Vikings players with one contract too many. You know, like Harrison Smith. You've been a great servant. You've been an incredible player. We're going to give you one more deal, you know? And you're like, when Harrison Smith signed that last deal, everyone was like, ooh, really? For a guy at that position, at that age, playing the way he's playing right now, is he going to justify that deal over the long term? Doesn't seem that likely. Now, Harrison Smith might, but the point is that was a kind of tendency of the previous regime. But I don't know if that was driven by the GM or if that's an ownership thing. Like Vikings ownership, the Wilfs, they love their guys, right? You know, Vikings guys, they're big into kind of, you know, let's keep our own, let's reward our own. Like, those are the guys. So if that's something that the new regime can achieve, sort of shifting away from that approach of giving our guys, you know, one contract too many kind of thing, let's get at the Belichick thing, right? I'd rather be a year too early getting rid of a guy than a year too late. If they can achieve that, I mean, that can move the needle.
I think that's interesting to see. And I think the other part of it is I think they're identifying their own undervalued assets around the league, players around the league, like Cameron Bynum, right? They just like went all in on Cameron Bynum's our starting safety last year, and they tried to rejuvenate a Jordan Hicks at linebacker, and I think that's a big part of it too. Is that they're complementing their high paid players with cheaper options who might be sneaky good at positions like safety and linebacker and all that. So anyway, where does Dalvin Cook potentially land if he gets released, or if there is a last minute trade? There's already rumors to Buffalo, because anytime there's a good running back available, there's rumors to Buffalo, where James Cook already lives.
Not just Buffalo, but like we're in this world now where the entirety of the AFC contenders are live options for like any big name superstar that gets released. True. Like if the Chiefs signed him, it wouldn't be surprising in the slightest. If Buffalo signs him, Cincinnati could get into that market. Like any of these teams now that are just looking for the one thing that'll put them over the top relative to the other insane contenders in the AFC are all live threats for a guy like Dalvin Cook.
Does Dalvin Cook, what does he have left? What is Dalvin Cook? He's coming off a year. He had an 89 overall grade in 2020. That was the best grade of his career. 90 rushing grade. I have always been a Dalvin Cook guy. Mm-hmm. Loved Dalvin Cook. I thought there was a point in the NFL where he was not necessarily producing as well as, say, Zeke Elliott or Todd Gurley. And I've got some old tweet out there. I'm like, Dalvin Cook's better than both of them. You know, maybe someone else at the time. And I stand by it. I think Dalvin was a better player than those guys throughout his career because of his explosiveness. But the last couple of years, grade down to 65 in 2021, 68 last year, played over 900 snaps. He's been just a good overall player. But what does he have left at this point as a guy that ran in the 4.4s at the combine but never played like that on the field? Always had that super burst to the edge and explosion. But is he losing a little bit of that at this point as he's the ripe old age of 27 now, Sam? He'll be 28 for the season.
I think Dalvin, if you can keep him healthy, I think Dalvin Cook is still pretty much as good as any running back in the NFL. And if you get him in an offense, again, like this is like the Bijan Robinson conversation all over again. If you already have a functioning run game and you just need somebody that can add value on top of that, Dalvin Cook can absolutely do that. So if you have the environment already for a decent running attack, and Dalvin Cook is available to come in and just be a guy that can take advantage of that, I mean, he can be crazy. His grade last year wasn't as good as previous years, but he still averaged over 3.18 yards after contact per attempt, broke 51 tackles. Dalvin Cook can still be absolutely elite.
One more stat I just want to throw out there with Dalvin. A lot of times we talk about yards after contact as the thing to look at for running backs. I do believe that stat gets skewed a little bit by the super fast guys, right? Like Jamal Charles always had good yards before contact because he was so fast and to just not getting touched. Dalvin's yards before contact took a big hit last year. Big hit, despite the run blocking maybe being better than they've had in recent years, right? About 8 to 10% lower than it was previously, and that might be indicative of losing a little bit of the burst, losing a little bit of that ability to just get to the second level untouched on certain plays, because I thought that was always what made Dalvin Cook special. I thought he could lower his pads and get 4 or 5 yards, but what really made him special is the fact that he could take it 40 or 50 at any given point. So maybe he's losing a bit of a step here, because that's, it's what happens with running backs in year 5 and 6 and 7. So any other teams that make sense for Dalvin Cook?
I mean, it really comes down to, what the cost is going to be. What's he looking for? Like, this is why I don't think they're able to get a trade done, because he's sitting on one of those contracts that nobody wants to pick up.
Yeah.
But once he becomes freely available, if they release him, then it's a case of, okay, how much is this going to cost us? And if it's a reasonable amount of money, there's a lot of teams in the NFL should be interested in that. If it's not,
basically every good I mentioned the Bills, you mentioned the Chiefs. If the Bengals wanted to finally release Joe Mixon and then replace him with a Dalvin Cook because it's potentially cheaper, and any good team could just add a Dalvin Cook.
Yeah.
And most teams aren't. A lot of teams have enough running backs that they wouldn't. But a team like Miami, with they're just stocking up on fast players.
I mean, Dallas didn't go the early running back route
that
we expected them to maybe do in the draft. They waited until Deuce Vaughn, whenever he was drafted in the day 3. They added Ronald Jones, I think, at some point in the offseason. But this is not a team that – and Tony Pollard is obviously coming off that broken leg, which a broken leg shouldn't impact him this year, assuming, it was a clean heel, and we haven't heard anything to say that it wasn't. But – Tony Pollard is a guy that they have steadfastly refused to give a workload to over the course of his career, instead giving it to Zeke Elliott. He's been a complimentary piece at best. You look at Dallas's backfield, and you're like, do they have the backfield that they want right now? Probably not. If they added Dalvin Cook to it, now you've got Dalvin and Tony Pollard and Deuce Vaughn as the gimmick guy. I mean, that certainly makes them feel a lot better.
Even Dalvin losing a step, if that's true.
Sure.
Is way more explosive than what Zeke Elliott was showing.
Well, also that the Cowboys have a better offensive line than probably the Vikings have ever had during Dalvin Cook's tenure there.
So I think Dallas might be the most obvious option for Dalvin Cook. Anyway, let's keep an eye on it. There's a lot of time on Dalvin Cook and the Vikings, but that's fun, team building stuff. Let's get to the other move that the Vikings made. Za'Darius Smith being traded to the Cleveland Browns. Another one where they're clearing cap space, and they're just exchanging some late round picks here. What were the official?
Yeah, there were two different. So the Browns gave up a 2024 fifth. Oh, there we go. So Browns get Za'Darius Smith, the 6th and 7th round pick from Minnesota in 2025. The Vikings get a 2024 5th round pick and a 2025 5th round pick. So effectively, when you work all this out, it shakes out to the Browns giving up the equivalent of a 7th round pick to take on Za'Darius Smith's contract, is effectively what we're talking about here.
And so I know sometimes, like when you see Za'Darius Smith's a good player. Like when you see a name go for a 7th round pick, it's almost always because of cap relief on one side and the other team saying, this is good use of a 6th or 7th round pick or whatever it might be, or the way the exchange went. And the Browns having the cap space to be able to handle this. I think I love this move for the Browns.
That's great for Cleveland. And that's despite them actually hitting their defensive line quite hard this offseason. Like that's been an approach. They added Okoronkwo as an edge. They added Dalvin Tomlinson. They came back in the draft with Isaiah McGuire. Like they've actually hit that general area pretty hard, and still went, you know what, Za'Darius Smith apparently is available for almost nothing except the contract. Let's get it done.
And I'll admit, I might be a sucker for, this name player moved from one team to the other for a late round pick. I always call it a win for the team getting the player. Not a loss for the team getting rid of him necessarily, because they probably had to. But I think this is a potential home run for the Browns. It's not going to add 3 wins to their team or anything like that, but is a sneaky good move. Za'Darius Smith over the last few years, he was hurt most of 2021, But in 2019 with the Packers, 88.8 pass rush grade. 2020 with the Packers, 84 pass rush grade. And then last year with the Vikings, 85 pass rush grade. Za'Darius Smith in his last 3 full seasons has been one of the most valuable edge defenders in the NFL. And he also moves around. He's got a lot of his pressure standing up over the B gap, rushing against guards and all that stuff.
That was about 50% last year.
Yeah, so his ability to move around the defensive front opens up for a pass rush package that has Myles Garrett on one side, Obo Okoronkwo, who's more of a true edge, but he's linebacker size, basically. He can move around a little bit, and Za'Darius Smith as guys to create mismatches. But we're talking value-wise, when you look at WAR, PFF WAR metric, Za'Darius Smith is up in this Cameron Jordan, Donnell Hunter, his former teammate with the Vikings, DeMarcus Lawrence, Brandon Graham, and some other big names because they were injured, guys like Nick Bosa because he missed some time or whatever. But during his last 3 full seasons, Za'Darius Smith is one of the most valuable edge defenders in the NFL.
I mean, he's basically averaging 70 pressures a season over those last 3 years, which is a figure that only 4 guys, edge rushers in the NFL last season, exceeded.
Now, he'll be 31 going into the season, but it's not like when the Ravens traded a 6th rounder or whatever it was for Calais Campbell in his mid-30s, they got 2 or 3 really good seasons out of Calais Campbell. So it's not like Za'Darius Smith's going to fall off a cliff or anything. I just think this is incredible use of essentially, like you said, the equivalent of a 7th-round pick for the Browns.
It's
incredible use of it to take on this money for a couple of years and really continue the upgrade on that defensive line.
He's the best defensive lineman the Browns have ever had alongside Myles Garrett. I mean, that's the way of looking at it.
And they've had Jadeveon Clowney.
That's what I mean.
The last couple of years.
He's better than Jadeveon Clowney. He's more consistent. He's better than anybody else they've had alongside him or opposite him during that time, which has been the entire approach of this Browns offseason. So I think when you look at these and you say you always have a tendency to view it as a win for the team acquiring the player, I think that's because it is. Like, these are inevitably one-sided trades because the team getting rid of the guy is voluntarily getting worse to fix their cap. It's like, we are getting rid of a player that is good because we just don't want to pay him this amount of money. We've got ourselves into trouble, and we're trying to save cash effectively, or save cap space along the way. But almost by definition, you are voluntarily getting worse. Like, you are removing a good player from your team, and it's not even the picks you're getting back that's the important part. It's getting rid of that contract.
Yeah, and so I think this is why the old tackle for the Steelers got traded, like Marcus Gilbert a few years ago. There was a point where NFL teams were putting the finishing touches on their offensive line for just, give me Marcus Gilbert, average starting tackle for a 5th-round pick. This is why I do think it's wise for teams to stock up on day 3 picks, and maybe 1 per year. If you've got the cap space, 1 per year, you flip 1 for a veteran, if they're available, right? There's always going to be a team like the Titans were, sending guys to the street because they had to clear cap space. The Vikings are clearing cap space. There's always going to be a team unloading. If you keep a healthy cap situation,
yes,
you can, and you stock up on day 3 picks. Is this part of my press conference? Stock up on day 3 picks, and then keep a healthy cap situation.
Well, that's the key.
If you could do those things, then you could pounce and grab a Za'Darius Smith at the right time.
This is why the approach of max out the credit card and then pay it off, at the start of the league year is potentially problematic, because you have these teams that do that to such an extreme level that you end up post-draft, having to sign your rookies and around now, where you just run out of cap space, and you either have to get rid of players and clear the space, or you have to, you're stuck. So the other teams, the teams that actually manage it in a different way and maintain a sufficient degree of cap space in May, in June, in the kind of quote-unquote off-season, those are the teams that have the flexibility to take advantage of what end up being some of the best value deals in the NFL, because you're exploiting the fact that other teams aren't in as healthy a situation as you. So last year, that was the Eagles, right? The Giants had to let go of James Bradbury, who was their best corner, because he cost $8 million, and they were like, too much, can't have it, got to get rid of him, we're too tight. And they got rid of him for the sake of $8 million. The Eagles were like, oh, really? James Bradbury's available for nothing on the open market? Yes. Pounced on him, and then you get the best cornerback tandem in the NFL last year in Bradbury and Darius Slay, and they end up being able to maintain that, keep him around this year, despite signing him to a big deal. So just because they had kept that situation where they had a good, healthy salary cap spot.
Anything else on Za'Darius? So the Browns, just to recap some of the Browns' moves this offseason, Obo Okoronkwo on the edge, opposite Myles Garrett. They had Jadeveon Clowney in and out last year with some injuries and all that stuff, but it was rough up front, especially at defensive tackle. They bring in Dalvin Tomlinson on a big deal. They've needed a big run-stopping nose tackle for a while. They drafted, they drafted Siaki Ika to also be a big-bodied nose tackle up front there. And then they bring in Za'Darius Smith on the edge as well. A couple other draft picks and signings, guys like Maurice Hurst, former top 5 PFF big board guy that fell to the 5th round because of heart issues and maybe play and size. But it looks much deeper on the Browns' defensive line right now.
Yeah. I mean, so Isaiah McGuire, I think, was a significant addition as well. Yeah, this is – on paper, this looks as good as that defensive line has looked for a long, long time, and it's probably the best collection of talent they've had around Myles Garrett since he's been there, which is huge because it's been Myles Garrett and nothing else for the last few years.
All right, let's go to the Dolphins, signing former Patriots tackle Isaiah Wynn. He was a street free agent, Isaiah Wynn. He was drafted in 2018 in the first round. A fascinating prospect, Sam, right? 6'2", guard-looking body. We assumed everybody in the NFL would project him to guard, and the Patriots let him play left tackle for 3 years. He was injured in 18, but 2019 through 21 played left tackle for the Patriots. And then just before last season, they moved him to right tackle, and shockingly had the worst season of his career. So Isaiah Wynn going to the Dolphins, we had talked about, hey, the Dolphins didn't necessarily attack offensive line in the draft, which is fine. They didn't have a ton of picks, and it's not like you're going to draft somebody. They didn't have a first rounder. It's not like you're going to draft somebody that's going to step in and, completely shore up the line. But a move like this, Isaiah Wynn coming in, he potentially upgrades left guard, where Liam Eichenberg is scheduled to start. I think he upgrades right tackle. As bad as Isaiah Wynn was at right tackle last year, he's probably better than what we've seen from Austin Jackson, another former first-round pick. And then we know that when Teron Armstead, the starting left tackle, got hurt last year, the likes of Greg Little came in and Brandon Shell came in and got shelled, and the offense looked completely different. Shelled, that's a pitching term. Oh. So Isaiah Wynn shores up 2.5 positions, I think, on this Miami offensive line.
Yeah, certainly I think 2, or with one of those being your swing tackle spot. I would try and keep him on the left side and say,
play left guard.
Right.
Yeah,
whatever you're doing,
I agree.
You're playing with one side of your body always doing the same thing. Like, I would not want to ask him to essentially man 3 different spots, one of which is on the complete opposite side of the line where he has had his worst season. I would say Eichenberg has been bad so far at left guard. You're going to come in, you're penciled in to start at left guard, and if we need to, when Teron Armstead inevitably misses 4 games this season, you're going to be the answer to come out, play left tackle, and we'll figure out who plays left guard during those 4 games. That's an easier thing to patch up. That would be my approach with Wynn, and I think you significantly upgrade whatever that is, 1.5 spots. Then you still need to figure out how you're manning right tackle, which is a problem area. He probably does upgrade right tackle over Austin Jackson, but it's not a big one, and it's not putting him in a good position to succeed.
I agree with you. Let's not move him back to right tackle. That was what happened last year.
But it is it's a great example of how we're in the middle of May, free agency is done, the draft is done, and Miami is able to go out there and for very little just add a starting left guard who should be a big upgrade.
Here's what Isaiah Wynn has done at left tackle the last couple of years. About an average first season in 2019, again, after he missed his rookie season due to injury. He was the number 18 most valuable left tackle in 2020, and then number 29 in 2021. So we're talking about there's 64 starting tackles in the league. He's been in the top half of the starters, the 2 full seasons that he's had. 2 out of the 3 full seasons he's had, we'll say, at left tackle. When they moved him last year, and he was graded in the green all of those years, 70, 82, 74 PFF grades, falls to 54 last year. And so we talk a lot about it's not that difficult to move from left to right tackle. when it's early in your career, when it's coming out of college, when it's something that you maybe did in college and within the last 2 or 3 years. But we're talking year 5 of Isaiah Wynn's NFL career. They were like, hey, go to the right side, and just flipped him with Trent Brown, I think for no reason, basically. And it crushed his production. So I think Isaiah Wynn, he hasn't played a ton of guard in the NFL. He dabbled a little bit there last year as well. He does only have 61 snaps at left guard. 86 snaps at left guard in his career. A little bit in 2020, a little bit last year. But I think it's a pretty safe play that he could step in and maybe be a little bit better than what Liam Eichenberg.
Yeah, I mean, it also, the swapping him sides, I mean, it got him benched effectively.
Yeah, I mean, Patriots fans are like, oh, this dude's terrible. It's like, well, first off, he's in that Charles Leno type of when he plays left tackle. It's like he's good enough. He'll have some bad games. He's good enough, though. But when you put him into an uncomfortable situation or a different situation, it's going to look ugly. So
it's
worth
pointing out, by the way, that at least half, the majority of his snaps at left guard came last season, where he had an atrocious game. That's not a great data point in his favor.
I get it.
It's a really small sample size, and I agree that I think if you put him in there for 17 games at left guard, he should be better than Liam Eichenberg, but that is largely built on faith rather than evidence at this point.
Yeah, I have faith. I have faith in Isaiah Wynn.
Weird.
He's a good player.
Weird body type as well. Like you mentioned the size. He's 6'2", just a little, 313, I think was what he was listed at coming in, 310, somewhere around that range, which is the 6'2" thing is the outlier part of that. It's not like you think really short arms immediately, but his arms are 33.4. Those are bigger than Rashawn Slater's. Those are like, I mean, we were questioning, is Skoronski a tackle or a guard with 32.25-inch arms? Like they're more than an inch bigger than Skoronski's, despite being 6'2". It's more that he's short rather than the arm length being a problem for him.
Yeah. Did you see his hand size in there too?
Did, yeah. Really, did he?
Thought you were going to highlight that.
I would never do that as a man with small hands.
8.5-inch hands for Isaiah Wynn. That's the, as we like to call it, 0th percentile among tackles.
Those are pretty small.
Yeah.
Are those smaller than Kenny Pickett's?
Yeah. I mean, Kenny was a little under 9, right? 8 3/4, Kenny Pickett.
Those have got to be close to the size of my hands, despite him being 6'2" and an offensive tackle.
All right, you want to get to the look at that NFL news taking up the first 40 minutes.
8.63 for Kenny.
Yeah, 8 5/8.
Sure.
Yes. So let's avoid the bear traps.
Yeah.
This offseason. This is a PSA for our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
What are we not going to buy into?
This is from our guy Ewan Kelly from Glasgow.
Ewan, as I said.
Yeah, not
Do you want to read the email?
Okay.
Just forwarded it to you.
Hi, boys. Just wanted to ask if there are media traps you guys know will be laid, but you want to state that you will avoid, i.e. the inevitable Sam Darnold looks great in the 49er system, but when the rubber hits the road, we know it will fail. Much love from Glasgow, as in Graham, Glasgow, Scotland. Ewan.
As in Graham, yeah. So, the Sam Darnold one is
that's the most obvious one, yeah.
That's a good one.
At some point, Sam Darnold is probably going to play games and look like a superstar within Kyle Shanahan's offense, and we are going to be hearing about how, I mean, you can just imagine the Dan O segment on ESPN in front of the giant computer screen with his tablet, just showing a play where Sam Darnold like hits a dude in stride over the middle on a post and saying, it was the Jets all along. Darnold just needed the right situation. Now this is the number, this is the guy. You can picture it right now. It's happening. And yet Sam Darnold will, in fact, remain Sam Darnold.
This whole segment is basically what's the narrative that Dan O is going to create that we're not going to buy into. That's really what's the media narrative that Dan Orlovsky is going to create on ESPN that we disagree with.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So that is a good one, the Sam Darnold thing, because that will happen.
So let's paint this picture. Brock Purdy's a little slow out of the gate.
The dude's 50-50 to even play with his wrecked elbow.
So Purdy's going to miss some time.
Right.
And let's say Trey Lance isn't ready to go week 1 for whatever. Sam Darnold's getting the start for
Or simply, I think it's entirely conceivable, given his career so far, that the 49ers simply elect to go with Sam Darnold over Trey Lance.
And I want to remind people that people bought into this last year. The last 2 years.
Every year of his career, in fact.
Sam Darnold in the first 3 games of each of his 2 Panther seasons was absolutely fantastic. And late last year, after a few good games, it kind of fell apart against the Bucks with the playoffs on the line. I know the stats weren't too bad in that game. With the playoffs on the line. And then against the Saints, where we went something like 5 of 16 for 43 yards and 2 picks in the last game of the season for 34 passing grade. So Sam Darnold's going to get a few starts for the Niners. I mean, coming out of training camp, the buzz is going to be huge. Sam Darnold, I mean, he's turned a corner.
Yep.
We're in year 6.
Yeah.
He's turned a corner. Kyle Shanahan has unlocked Sam Darnold's potential.
Yep.
The Niners are 3-1, and maybe 4-0. A few weeks into this, probably just 3-0. We'll stick with 3-0. The Niners are 3-0. Sam Darnold's got a passer rating of 119. He's feeding Deebo Samuel and George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk and all that stuff, and it's like, this is it. They have found the next. He's getting compared to Joe Montana. How did Joe Montana do in his first 3 games as a 49er? Not as well as Sam Darnold. How about Steve Young? Barely even saw the field, not like Sam Darnold as a 49er. And then week 4, it all comes crashing down.
Yeah.
So we're not going to buy in. Although, if Sam Darnold did play for the 49ers, how is he Shanahan-proof?
Is he Shanahan-proof? No.
Because we've seen everybody.
No, I mean, I think Kyle Shanahan.
Not everybody won with Kyle Shanahan, but they all had numbers and succeeded. The C.J. Beathards of the world put up numbers.
I think Kyle Shanahan is eminently capable of turning Sam Darnold into what looks like a useful NFL quarterback that in any other system would not be.
Yeah. So we're not going to buy into that one.
No.
What else do we not buy into?
Other people will do, in fact. So a similar narrative is going to form around 1, maybe 2 of the rookie starting quarterbacks. When you see them in training camp and, the bullets aren't live and they're just dropping dimes in there, the accuracy's great, everything looks fantastic. Preseason is probably, they're going to get the Zach Wilson preseason where it's like, wow, this just looks so efficient and just so much better than what was there before. And then week 1, like the switch flips and all of a sudden defenses are trying and the wheels fall off.
What are the worst, the most overrated preseasons in recent memory?
I mean, Wilson's is one of them.
Zach Wilson and Daniel Jones, I believe.
Yeah.
Right? Daniel Jones goes like 29 for 34.
Well, that was
during the whole preseason.
Yes, that was intensified by the fact that like the Giants were like pulling receipts out for people, and you were like, oh, you thought Daniel Jones was a bad draft pick, huh? Look at this.
It comes back to Orlovsky again, though, because Dan was on ESPN, like looking hard at the camera, just being like, Daniel Jones, I'm sorry, man. I didn't believe in you.
Yeah, apologies.
I was wrong.
Apologies were given.
I apologize for doubting you.
Yeah.
I wasn't familiar with your game. That was happening during the preseason. And look, Daniel Jones just signed a contract. Maybe everybody was right. But he's been, an average starter throughout his career, despite having the greatest preseason in history. On the other hand, we have seen preseason quarterback play where it's like Dak Prescott looked great right off the bat and looked like a thing. And that was true. And Jared Goff looked like he didn't even know the plays in the preseason, and that was a thing. His rookie season, he couldn't even complete a pass. So sometimes the preseason stuff is real. But I would say, Zach Wilson and Daniel Jones had the biggest preseason hype or best look in preseason that ended up disappointing.
I think it's more indicative of a bad preseason is probably an issue, whereas a good preseason does not necessarily mean a guy's going to be good. I mean, this is specifically a quarterback more than anything else. But I think that's like if you have a quarterback that you expect to be good going into the season and he struggles badly in preseason, that feels like a problem. Whereas evidently, if a quarterback looks fantastic in preseason and just comfortable and completing all his passes and blah, 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 that does not mean that he's going to be good once the real defense starts playing in week 1. Particularly now when teams are not treating preseason with any kind of seriousness. Like the guys you're facing are second string at best for the majority of the time.
What about the training camp receiver who goes off?
Yeah.
So this is the Dante Moncrief for 9 straight years. This is
Romeo Doubs
last year. And look, there's kernels of truth in this. Like Romeo Doubs not only did look good, there were times during the season last year where, he looked fine. But the narrative part of it was, I was a little guilty as well. I bought in last year. Mm-hmm. I stepped on the bear trap. The Romeo Doubs looks like Davante Adams. Kind of moves like him, kind of catches the ball like him. There's a lot of targets available in the Packers offense. Romeo Doubs going to be an 85-catch guy and not completely replace Davante Adams, but the Packers are going to be fine. They've got fourth-rounder Romeo Doubs. He's tearing it up in camp. Ask his teammates. They can't cover him. Who's the most impressive guy at camp? Romeo Doubs. Can't cover him. Dude's open all the time. 7-11 even. Romeo Doubs.
Aaron Rodgers was talking him up.
Aaron Rodgers was talking him up. Absolutely. So we're all expecting Romeo Doubs to be an 85-catch weapon in the Packers offense. So this year, when you hear that, I don't know, which it doesn't even just have to be a rookie. This was a Bryan Edwards a couple years ago. And that was true as long as it's fourth quarter or overtime.
Auto.
Right? Mm-hmm. Bryan Edwards with the Raiders. Looks like the next Jerry Rice out there in camp. Gruden was talking him up, all the Raiders, and just never materialized.
Yeah, so don't buy into that one random name that's tearing up training camp as a receiver, completely untouchable. Who's it going to be? I'm not going to hold you to this, but who's your bet for that guy?
Well, it's a guy that we like. Tank Dell.
Tank Dell.
Tank Dell. We're going to get reports. Tank Dell is uncoverable in Texans camp.
All right.
Can't find him. Better than I thought. Actually, I thought he was only a slot receiver because he's short, and then we put him outside. He's whipping outside corners too. Derek Stingley couldn't even hang with him in camp. That's what we're going to hear. Tank Dell is wide open all the time.
I might say more about Derek Stingley than it does Tank Dell, unfortunately.
It might. Hey, I mean, that was like the Hunter Renfrow ran that one route against Jalen Ramsey in camp. It's like, look at this. Hunter Renfrow with this, quadruple move on Jalen Ramsey.
Yep.
Tank Dell. Do you have any other?
Yes, I'm going to give you two receivers that I think could be that guy. They're both from the same team. Either Rashee Rice, our SMU rookie for Kansas City, or
that's already happening. It already happened in rookie minicamp.
Justin Ross is going to be the guy again.
Oh, a couple Chiefs. Yeah. Who's going to be the next 100-catch guy from Mahomes?
You're going to hear that Justin Ross is putting it all together after that redshirt year. Mahomes loves him. He's making all these insane acrobatic catches over people. He's the guy that nobody's been talking about that's going to step into that starting role and replace Juju and put up the numbers.
If Rashee Rice, that's the thing though. If Rashee Rice buzz happens, I'm buying in. I'm like, of course he is.
Right.
Well, I can see it. And for all the question marks I had for Rashee Rice on film, I'm like, that dude's a baller.
That's why you've got to prepare yourself to avoid stepping in the bear trap.
One more name, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine. With the Tennessee Titans, in part because I was there in person where I was pretty impressed with him, and he's going to have plenty of opportunities because it's him and Treylon Burks in Tennessee and a whole bunch of hopefuls basically. Mm-hmm. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine is going to be a good 2 for Tennessee. We're going to hear. He's going to be perfect there.
One more bear trap to avoid. I think there's going to be a team from the NFC South. So this idea of, you added Derek Carr, you could easily win the division. That division's terrible. One of those teams is going to emerge as better than the others. And they're going to go on a run, and they're going to have a very good record built largely off the fact that the NFC South has one of the worst strengths of schedule on paper heading into a season ever. Like how difficult their schedule looks right now. Obviously, this is to a degree unknowable, right? Because it's built off previous evidence, not future performance. But it looks like that entire division essentially has a cakewalk. And if one of them is just able to emerge slightly as being above average, they could go on a run where they have one of the best records in the NFL. And we're going to be hearing about them kind of the way we were hearing about the Giants or the Vikings last year, where it's like, they're for real. It's time to buy in. They're 6-1, blah, blah. And you're like, no, they're not. They're not good. They're going to get bounced. Like, they might end up winning 12 games. And then once they get into the playoffs, they're going to get shellacked by somebody that's actually good. This is going to play out for the NFC South this year.
I mean, it might not just be because of the NFC South or anything like that. That's a fair point, but last year's Minnesota Vikings and New York Giants. Now, they just happened to play each other in round 1 of the playoffs, which was interesting. The two teams that every data point screamed mid-level team. Mid, as the kids would say. Mid. But the wins said double digits, right? Everything said mid, but the wins said double digits. And even the Giants, they won a playoff game. So I think I don't even think it's a narrative thing. It's just the annual assumption that your team was the same. You are what your record was.
Right.
And last year you won 10 games or
But
11 games or whatever it was, and then you got better, right? Every team got better this offseason. Therefore, you're going to, stack up a couple extra wins there.
But the narrative is specific to that division. There's going to be a team coming out of that division that has a record that looks like Minnesota or New York last year, where over the first 2 months of the season, first few weeks, it's like, ooh, look at this surprise by New Orleans or, Carolina or whatever. And then after 2 months, now all of a sudden the record is starting to get too good to ignore, and we're going to hear, it's time to buy in. That was the game. The last win against whoever, like some other crappy team, that was the game that means we have to buy into them now. They are contenders. They're for real. It's time to buy in. This is Derek Carr's year, right? And it's just look who they faced. Like, they've racked up a bunch of wins against crappy teams, and they're still not good. Like, this is prepare yourself. It's going to happen.
I'm not sure there's an equivalent to this one, but last year during training camp and everything leading up to the season, the Matt Ryan signing in Indianapolis had some of the most interesting think pieces. Just like, hey, last year we could barely get in and out of the huddle with that dude Carson Wentz, But now Matt Ryan's out there. He's like a coach on the field. He's smarter than everybody. He's changing plays. He's like, Frank, throw a drag route on this thing. Why don't we add a little adjustment to this play? Why don't we throw a tag in there? I'm Matt Ryan. I'm 38. I'm smart. Been around. He struggled just completing a pass last year as well.
Yeah.
Because he couldn't move under pressure, and he was getting old and lost it. I don't know if there's an equivalent this year, but I would just beware of like the grizzled veteran who's coming in and is changing the culture and the playbook and all that stuff if they've shown signs of not being able to play. Nobody's really
signed one of those players, right? The kind of aging guy looking for one last go around for a couple of years while they bridge to something else.
Well, then,
like Derek Carr is the closest, and he's way younger than that.
Carr's the guy. I mean, they invested in him to be the guy in New Orleans.
That's what I mean.
Is it going to be Andy Dalton? Is it Andy Dalton in Carolina? Hey, Andy Dalton might be our starter.
No, because he won't be.
He won't be, right?
At least not beyond like 2
weeks. We're rolling with Dalton.
But the closest we come to the established NFL veteran coming in for one last go-round is Derek Carr, and he's like 32.
It's a young group of QBs now.
Yeah.
Is that it? Any other bear traps?
You're probably going to hear a lot of hype around Sam Howell and Eric Bieniemy in Washington through training camp just because,
I don't know if that's a bear trap necessarily. It's just that it's going to be fun to watch.
Yeah.
Sam Howell and Desmond Ridder.
He's the classic guy where you might hear a lot of hype about him early, and then we're not going to have any idea until we're a few weeks into the season.
Miles ahead of where he was last year at this time.
Yeah.
Miles ahead. Like, the dude could barely even tie his shoes last year. Now look at him spitting out full plays, audibling at the line. It's night and day. Sam Howell, Desmond Ridder. Guy didn't even know where his locker was last year. Now, command of the huddle. Commands the huddle.
Yeah.
Knows what everybody's doing on the field. That's what he does. I'd be a good GM. I get all those.
Well, perfect. Perfect segue, perfect timing into what will be a recurring segment now on the PFF NFL podcast. This was an email sent in to us. So, if your emails are good, we'll co-opt them. We'll take advantage of them. We'll give you credit. We'll steal the ideas, essentially. This one came in from Luke Cook. It was one of the most lengthy, I think, and detailed emails we've had in, which I'm changing slightly, but I love the idea. Essentially, the concept will be, we hear all the time, this is what I would do. Steve Palazzolo as an NFL GM. This is what I would do, and you get a little monologue about it. So we're going to take advantage of that and turn it into a segment. If you have questions about how Steve, as a GM, would approach certain things, then send us in with the title line consultant GM so we can find it. Essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to put you on a podium over there, and we're going to find out how you would approach certain topics. So this will be Steve Palazzolo, consultant GM.
I like it. Okay.
His suggestion was Maverick GM, which I think is also good, but consultant I think is a more appropriate concept.
Got to earn the Maverick title, I believe.
Yeah, so we've drawn up a little graphic up here on the screen for Steve Palazzolo, consultant GM. Destiny provides the opportunity. Character fulfills it. So if you just like to take your position over there next to the podium, then I can pitch you a little question that we're going to have and get an idea of how Steve Palazzolo, consultant GM, would approach this particular topic.
Oh, geez. Don't lean on this.
No, I wouldn't lean on that. That's one of those music stands rather than a podium itself.
That's
it's
not
going
going
to be
great.
particularly stable.
It's a good start so far.
Yeah.
Yep. There we go.
Don't touch.
Hands behind your back.
Don't touch the podium. There we
That's
go.
why I have
Look
my
at
pen.
that. Perfect. And so for this
Usually
question,
I would have a little background before questions come in.
Yeah. No, you got to know these things. This has got to be up in the brain. Now, you can't see this, I don't think. Have you got a monitor over there? No?
No monitor.
Okay, so what we've done is we have a background, a press conference background that, because it's not team specific this time, is the Rob Lowe of backgrounds. It's the NFL Shield.
Nice.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're May 15th. Our rookie mini camps have been taking place. We're headed to the offseason. And I would like to know how Palazzolo, consultant GM, would approach the 90-man roster, right? We heard a little bit before about how you would steal extra roster spots for special teams, essentially all those kinds of things. Teams are filling out their 90-man roster. They're getting these training camp bodies. How would you get an edge for the 90-man roster getting those camp bodies? Where would you plow your resources? Where would you ignore completely? How would you approach the whole thing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I appreciate the question. And, we're just trying to take it one day at a time here. We're going to start by going one day at a time here, Sam. So it's going to start with the quarterback position, which I have already discussed. I'm bringing in 5 or 6 quarterbacks. And they're not just going to be camp arms, okay, because I've already invested in the draft in 1 to 2 quarterbacks per draft every single year. So we're going to be rolling 4 deep with legitimate players who are going to be competing for roster spots. And my starter is probably not going to be playing during the preseason. He'll be sitting. So it's QBs 2, 3, and 4 that are going to see all the time. And they're either going to make a name for themselves and become potential trade candidates, or we're just going to keep developing them. So we're going to have at least 6 quarterbacks on the 90-man, 4 of whom we're expecting to make the team, a couple extra camp arms in there to keep them fresh. I also think you need a lot of depth at receiver. So we're going to be rolling really deep at receiver and at cornerback, right? Because we're not only have we invested in there in the draft and free agency with volume, you got to be able to practice. It's all about practice, right? You got to be able to get more reps at those valuable positions. I'm also going to take the Eagles approach, try to find a rugby player every single year. You got to get a rugby player in there, Sam. Steal a Jordan Mailata every now and then. I'm also going to have, who are some of my favorites? I'm going to have John Ross there every single year. John Ross is always going to be there. I'm going to probably take 2 or 3 guys who run sub 4.3. I don't care if they can catch the ball or not. They're there. We're bringing them in. We're bringing in fast guys, and we're going to see if they can actually catch the ball and compete. Anthony Schwartz will probably be the guy that's on my team every single year after the Browns cut him. And we're just going to bring him in and let them compete for the wide receiver 4 to 5 spot as a deep threat. So when we get to the 53-man, we're going to have extra quarterback positions. We'll probably try to steal an extra receiver, probably try to steal an extra DB, and we're going to have to sacrifice somewhere, and that's special teams. We might not even practice special teams during minicamp or anywhere else. We might not even practice, Sam, and everybody. So it's a great question. I think we're trying to steal extra roster spots in all pass game positions. We're definitely going to have to bring in extra offensive and defensive linemen as well, but there's only so many extra spots to go. So I think we're going to end up sacrificing some core, 4-team special teamers. We're going to have to lose some of those guys and, stitch it together with guys. You're going to have to find people that can, be a gunner every now and again. Ooh, I found a vice. Nobody on the team who's just doing that exclusively. Does that answer your question?
It does, yeah. Joey 2 times in the chat would like to know what position I would hold in your regime.
Still to be determined. There was a couple years ago I thought you might be my social media manager. And, I think, you've grown a lot over the last couple of years. You might just be I might have you as an assistant.
An assistant.
Assistant to the GM.
Just an unnamed.
Assistant to the general manager,
right.
I believe would be a good spot for you, Sam, because you're so opinionated, sometimes condescending. I would want that sounding board consistently, right? I would want you making a face at me and making fun of my decisions and making fun of my moves and all that stuff, just so I could reconsider. Because I'm not going to be in an echo chamber here, Sam. I'm going to encourage, a little discussion and debate. And I think you'd bring that to the table as the assistant to the general manager.
One more question from the chat. Walt would like to know if you would consider a scouting job for GM Walt for a mere $30,000 a year salary.
Absolutely not, Walt. I have seen your takes in the chat. I think they are out of control. I think the fact that your name is all caps is a little abrasive, not going to lie. So I think the fact that you are always screaming how smart you are, I think it's good for us, for the PFF NFL podcast. It's good for the algorithm. It makes it look like we've got great engagement with our listeners. But as far as hiring you full-time for a job, there's absolutely no way that I would do that. So I encourage you to keep contributing. I'm entertained by your takes, and we do respond to them in kind. But under no circumstances would I ever actually hire you for a real job, even at $30,000 a year. Thank you, though, for the question, Walt.
It's perfect. I think that's all I got. Well done.
All right, thanks. I'll be here some other time to take more questions. We appreciate it. Palazzolo for GM.
NFL podcast at pff.com if you want to fire in your questions for Palazzolo, consultant GM. That was a phenomenal first segment, and long may it rain. I love that. I think that's a perfect off-season segment for us to bring back and repeat constantly.
Maybe in season. I'll be like the in-game management coach or defensive line, rotation coach, and I'll start criticizing in-game defensive line rotations and everything.
Walt came in and revised his demands to $15K a year.
Yeah, we'll talk back. We'll catch up again. $15K, that's it, huh?
Yeah. I mean, at that point, it's becoming too good a value to turn down,
It might be. Yeah. It might be. I did say, contrarian takes are allowed.
That's true. I mean, think of the check and balance there, No matter what your scouts say, Walt's going to have a different take. It's going to send you back to the tape and make sure you've really nailed that first evaluation.
Yeah, I'm going to let them I'm going to need to see some hit rates and some results. All right, that was fun. Is that it for today?
Yeah, I think so.
Well, that was fun. So we're going to be back again. We're going 5 days again this week. We'll have we're going to mix it up. Trevor coming in? I hope.
Hopefully tomorrow.
Yeah.
I haven't actually got confirmation of that.
For a couple shows?
Let's assume that's happening.
We also have something big. Can we set it for Thursday? Do you want to do the expansion draft Thursday?
Okay.
So Andrew Boll, one of our listeners, I believe he works. I don't even want to mention what he does, but that's his name. He works in sports. So we'll see how much he wants to reveal on that. Has done incredible legwork to set up a hypothetical expansion draft. So we should really do this well. Like you and I each come up with some team names, and we should really, really do this well. He has set up the expansion draft for us based off current rosters. He made it a guesstimate as to who would be available based off each team.
Okay.
And we have all the rules, and that when you draft a player in the expansion draft, you take on their full contract and cap and bonuses and guarantees and all that stuff. And there's rules on how many you could pick from each team that have put players in the pool and all that stuff. He's done all of that legwork where we could just show up and draft. So I think we should do that. The other thing that I think would be fun with this is use some way of keeping track of it during the season too. Like even though they're not playing for our teams, keep grades and WAR and various things like that. So you actually drafted the better team over time. Then maybe you'll be the GM.
You're the guy with you're Mr. Ultimate over there. You're the project manager over there. It feels like you should set us up some kind of. There must be a way of creating like a dummy team in that database, so that we can just plug it. We can just dial up instead of Cincinnati Bengals. You just click on your made-up franchise.
You can create
the whole thing is set up.
We can create a player list. We can create player lists with our teams.
That's just a half-ass weak way of doing it.
Listen,
I want you to go in there and set up like an actual fake team. 2 of them, in fact.
All right. I've only got so many developers who are servicing hundreds of professional football teams.
You tell me this
in
is
college
less
football
valuable
teams.
than work that
Slightly.
generates the company money?
Slightly. So
Okay.
There's only so much I can do. But I'm excited. I think Andrew's done some amazing work setting this up, and we want to give him full credit and get him involved in the show. And Thursday, if you ready, will you have your research done by Thursday?
Sure.
I've got a lot of research. We have to do the draft. We'll have to do, maybe it's a 2-part show where we do the expansion draft. See how long that takes. I have to go meet with the team that day. Might be local. Just throwing that out there. So we have to do an expansion draft and then the NFL draft, where we would both get the hypothetical first and second pick and then like the last pick of certain rounds and all that stuff. So we gotta go check that out. So that'd be exciting. That'll be a fun off-season project. So sound good?
Yep.
All right. Well, that's it. Thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again tomorrow with more PFF NFL Podcast.